Good morning. Welcome to the live room here at binary.com. Thank you for joining us. Today it's 8 a.m. UK time at the moment, and we're going to start with our charts. We're going to take a look at technical analysis. We're going to take a look at Forex and price movements and try to analyze what has happened in the past and make some informative judgments on what could happen in the future based on that. Before we actually look at the charts, technical analysis, and all the Forex movements, first of all, we're going to take a look at this PowerPoint though, explaining that it's hosted by binary.com, and my name is Chris. And of course, we have to explain of the risks involved. Trading for exchange and global financial markets and products is considered high risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Please seek the advice of an independent financial advisor for more information on that. And this webinar is for educational and informational purposes only. If you're watching this live webinar, then by continuing watching this webinar, you agree with the disclaimer and the content stated here. If you're watching the recording, which will be posted a few hours from now, you can pause the video to read the entire disclaimer. We thank you for your attention, and we can continue and head over to this slide explaining that this is a live webinar, but the recording will be available a few hours from now, roughly speaking, and that you can be able to receive that update when you register with your name and email at blog.binary.com/weeklytradingroom. Today's goal, as always, we're going to take a look quickly at the event calendar of the economic calendar here, and then we're taking a look, of course, at the euro dollar, for instance, the pound dollar, dollar yen, AUD USD, and also XAU USD. So what do we have this week? Well, today we have a bank holiday in Japan, otherwise USD pending home sales and New Zealand trade balance. Usual red tagged events. Let's see what the rest of the week will be in store for traders. We have pound news tomorrow morning. We have the Canadian Bank of Canada governor speaking tomorrow. Japanese monetary policy statement. That's something to be careful of. ADP on the USD on Wednesday. And FOMC statement. That's a biggie, of course. Thursday we have bank holidays in Europe and Germany, for instance, France, Switzerland, plus Fed Chairman Yellen speaking. And Friday we have NFP. So, well, it's going to be a difficult week just looking at the risk calendar here, right? NFP is always big. We have unemployment rate on Friday. We have days off on Thursday, Wednesday ADP plus FOMC. So that's going to be not an easy week. If we look at, for instance, the euro dollar, we already had, of course, quite a substantial slowdown the last 2 weeks. That sometimes could happen, and we don't always have, a lot of price movement. Now, definitely last week and the week before was slow. If you look at the weekly candle, at the low and the high of the weekly candle, it was 70 pips. Well, even daily candles are usually bigger than that. And the pound dollar had 77 pips, and the dollar yen had 76 pips. So these are very small weekly candles. And this, of course, indicates the lack of volatility, lack of movement. For whatever reason, the last 2 weeks has not seen much of that movement. Now, will that change this week? It could. Although we have a lot of news events, those news events could actually, provide a lot of movement. Although they could be very concentrated at those news events, they could be very fast and thereby difficult to trade, right? Because if the price movements are happening at the time of the news release, these are fast movements, these are big movements, and this is very difficult to trade. So we'll have to see how this week starts. This week we see a bit of a movement on the euro dollar and pound dollar. It could be a good sign that we have some movement this week, but there's no guarantee that we'll have a good price action this week. Last 2 weeks were slow, so we'll have to be patient to get some confirmation indeed that we're going to get some movements. Euro dollar, for instance, here, 4-hour chart, price is stuck between these two blue lines, and that has just indicated, summarizing basically the last 2 weeks and the lack of movements, just bouncing up and down between those two blue lines. Will we break those two blue lines? That is the question, I would say, at the moment this week. Looking at those two blue lines, we can see we're approaching resistance. Price is moving up, but it is approaching points in the past where price has moved down from. If we do break the top or bottom, that's personally where I get to start a bit more interested. I want to see a clear breakout out of the zone to know that the sideways movement could potentially be over. A break of the blue line, we have some space up to the red line. That itself could still be a resistance, but if we break the 138.70 level, or let me say it this way, if we break, move down from that, let me do that again, 1 second. If we move up to that line, pause at that line, and then break, that would be a decent breakout above that red line to the next resistance, which is all the way here. Alright, we have a resistance right here, a top and a minus 272 target at 139.70, maybe an extension up to the 140 psychological number. So that's what I'm primarily looking for, is the bullish space between the blue and the, let's say, dark red, and the dark red, and the dark red, and the minus 272 target right there. Obviously, the second space is a bit bigger than the first one. That's the space to the upside. Space to the downside, if we break the support, is limited because we have fib targets, fib retracements, I should say, that could provide support for a bounce back up. So the space to the downside is there upon the break of the blue consolidation, but not much. And I would be expecting a bounce at 137.60, at 137.20, 137 for upside. So primarily, although we are in a big consolidation, primarily looking at this at a bullish structure, either as a breakout or as a bounce. And why is that? The key reason is, if you look at this daily chart, all of these dips have so far been retracements for more upside. That particular analysis still remains intact. I see no reason to change that unless we break below this green line. Of course, that will alter the reality, the structure that we're seeing. So far, whatever the ECB basically has been saying about quantitative easing and so forth, it has led to retracements, it has led to dips, but as long as no action is backing up those words, the euro dollar remains in this uptrend, and all these dips were actually reasons for retracements for more upside. Right? The same happened with the 61.8 fib. We had an upside break, a hook back, and bounce. This could be the same, a hook back, and bounce. That's the main thing so far. Unless we really break this bottom, these bottoms in here in the trend line, then of course things start to look more bearish. Until then, looking for actually bullish structure to continue. The question is when and where. That could be from lower. It could be right now, right here upon the break. That's the short summary, I would say. Really much to add I don't have. If you look at higher time frames, then one could think of a resistance trend line like that, for instance, that's being broken as we speak. And thereby, if we do break out here, what is potentially happening, especially if we break above 140, there could be space up to the 78.6 fib at 143. So that is still a resistance level, by the way, 143. Of course, we have to keep an eye on what's happening, not only on the technicals, but also on the fundamentals this week, where we have FOMC and the NFP. Of course, those are major influences on price. This is the 1 hour chart. Now let's zoom into a bit lower time frame. We looked at the weekly, and you can see just a consolidation, a sideways move, bouncing up and down. We'll have to see if this is indeed a sustainable start of a breakout, or just one of those continuations of this sideways zone. And who knows, maybe we'll just continue in this zone for longer than we think. These blue lines are indicating that. Pound dollar. Pound dollar is looking a bit different. First of all, it has even a more bullish structure than the euro dollar in the long-term grand scheme of things. If you look at this daily chart, it's quite obvious that we're in an uptrend. I mean, the price is very low here on the left, and price is a lot higher on the right. So that's pretty simple: higher highs, higher lows. However, if you look at the 4 hour chart, or even on the daily chart, you can see most recently quite a struggle to beat this resistance level. That resistance level had a struggle here once, twice, 3, maybe 4. So not an easy level to break. And although price is in that uptrend, as we already indicated here, from summer last year, in fact, right, a lot of upside, it is struggling here with this resistance level. So this could be what we call an ascending wedge, where the bottoms are making higher lows, and the tops are flat. Those ascending wedges basically have obviously two perspectives, but the most logical perspective is upside continuation. If that were not to happen, then this blue line would have to break the support blue line, and we would see a bigger retracement / reversal potential to the downside. Until that happens, until this blue line is not intact anymore, we are looking still for upside though. And price is definitely still above the blue. So here too, although choppy, although difficult on this 4-hour chart here, look, price is making basically the sideways move. Price remains in a bullish outlook and trend. It's just that because price is so close to resistance, there's no space really at the moment, and we need to wait for either a break and uptrend continuation above the orange lines, or we need to break for support. We need to wait for support to break, sorry. And we could see this potential, and maybe this one, right? That depends at that point in time. In the meantime though, we can see that the downside break doesn't seem to be happening. In fact, we're getting a very bullish bounce at the moment. So this could be an indication, looking at price action signal. If I look at this hourly candle, it's looking very, very bullish to me, and it looks like we're going to have a decent probability of a bullish break as we speak. The target of that would be 169.70 in my opinion, roughly 170. That would be a level, of course, to be careful of as this pound dollar goes up. That could be maybe a level that this week could have the next struggle, the next resistance spot. All right. Now, if you have any questions, of course, by all means, let me know in the chat, and I hope I can see that. Don't forget that if you send a chat, to send it to all attendees so that I can see it. So this is looking, especially the pound dollar, the euro dollar, not so much as yet, although we see a bullish price action as well. After weeks of consolidation, maybe this is the start of some bullishness on these two particular pairs. Let's take a look at the odd USD now. Or before I do that, actually, let me take a look at this weekly chart, see if I forgot anything to mention. Why 170, by the way, one thing is, the reason 170 is important is because 170.40 to be precise, is because of this top here. Alright, that's the last resistance in a way. That's why it's so important. And anything else on the 15? You can see on the 50-minute chart, really a big spike up. 86, about 45 pips. That's quite a lot of movement already, so early on in the Monday morning, in fact, beginning of the week. Odd USD. Odd USD on the daily chart is in a bullish structure. It is in a uptrend channel, and it is nice. It is making higher highs, higher lows, well-balanced uptrend channel, and price thereby has the potential to move up. If you put a fib on this last swing high, swing low prior to this uptrend channel, you can see that price has actually broken through the 61.8 fib, and the next one is the 78.6 fib at 95.20, or even the 886 at 96.30. Therefore, looking at this, there seems to be bullish space to the upside indicated by this these green squares. Sorry. So that seems to be bullish potential. However, despite this uptrend channel on the daily chart, the 4-hour chart has been moving down. What does that mean, actually? Considering the fact that it has quite a corrective characteristics, why is that? Because it's moving slow and surely, steadily to the downside, not a lot of momentum to the downside most of the time. In the grand scheme of things, this is looking like a bull flag. This is looking like a continuation pattern of upside. All right. If we look at the momentum prior to that, we see a lot of steam to the upside. The downside is moving slow. That's why an upside break seems to be quite a decent probability. A break of that blue line would confirm that potential. All right. So that's basically what I'm looking for this week. If I look at the currency market so far, I think that The euro dollar is the least interesting. The pound dollar is the second best. AUD/USD seems to be most interesting. Primarily the pound and AUD maybe at the moment. But in general, besides the things I've mentioned, one of the reasons why we could see a bounce in here as well is that we have a particular strong level here. Why is that? Because we had a very fast-paced upside, then we had a consolidation, and then we had another fast-paced upside. Those particular zones, that red box in the middle of two momentum upsides, are usually support levels. So anywhere in this zone, I wouldn't be surprised to see a support and a bouncing area for upside indeed. So in that regard, not surprisingly, getting a bounce right here, right now, at this particular spot. Of course, it depends whether we'll get follow through on the AUD/USD to the upside, but the bouncing spot definitely seems to be occurring, and the dollar weakness that we've seen against the pound and also against the euro is now acting against the Aussie as well, although some struggle here with this 1 hour wick on top of this most recent candle. Alright, so maybe not as clear on the AUD/USD, the dollar weakness as yet. The primary confirmation would be the blue line here for that upside. In the meantime though, the ultimate support level I would say is about 92, and we could maybe still see some correction prior to that bounce. Okay, it's not so that this must be the turn. We could still see price linger here, make some downside, and then bounce around lower, closer to 92. Right? That's something we have to be aware of. It's always possible. So one way of knowing whether that downside correction is over is this blue line, as I already said earlier. Otherwise, we have that potential. Why is that so? Because if you look at the 15, this upside is looking quite slow and corrective itself. And if you put a trend line connecting these bottoms, that's something to keep an eye on, these trend lines, because if those break, that could be actually a lack of upside and maybe some downside potential. But that downside, of course, definitely risky because there's not much space before you bump into bigger support. How about the dollar yen? The dollar yen is, I would say, the least interesting, just because it has been going sideways more or less with its ups and downs, though. For 3 months, this basically a lot of spikiness, but not going anywhere. It's just quite sideways in its outlook. And obviously, we had a lot of bullishness prior to that. We had about 1.5 years uptrend on the dollar yen, but currently it isn't in a trend. Just very plainly put, prices having a spikes up and down, but not getting any follow through. So in my opinion, it's going to be interesting to see if we can break the purple line here, for instance, for upside continuation. That would mark the uptrend continuation. Or are we going to actually correct bigger and longer? Then we break the red and magenta for potential downside to the 61.8 at 100, or maybe even lower down to 99. In the meantime, though, until one of these lines breaks, who knows? We could actually be bouncing and continuing bounce in this zone, for another week, 2, 3, 4. That is possible. So, therefore, until we break, not so interested, and the chances we'll break this week maybe not too high, considering the fact that this has lasted already three months. Now, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be any trade on the dollar yen, by the way. Just saying that, in my opinion, it's not the most interesting. However, if you zoom in, obviously there are some trend lines that make sense or interesting things that could happen. For instance, when we break this blue line here, we had some downside. If you look at the hourly, sometimes there's still, despite the lack of movement on higher time frames, there could be something interesting going on. At the moment, price seems to be moving down slowly in this channel. It could keep doing that until bigger support is hit. Then we'll probably see a bounce. Or if we break above blue, maybe there's that potential to move up a bit higher, retrace some of this downfall to a higher level, and we could, for instance, see maybe a breakout trade up to 103.10, maybe even 103.60. But not my favorite trade idea. It's just could happen with this dollar yen. XAU USD. Well, that seemingly still not so interesting in my opinion. It had upside, price broke through that uptrend. It had a downtrend, broke out of that downtrend, broke out of the uptrend. So there's a lot of messiness and choppiness going on here at the moment regarding this XAUSD, and we are at this resistance line, the light blue line at the moment. It's going to have at least a break of that line to have some potential to the upside, I would say. So maybe, for instance, this 61.8 fib, that could be potential to the upside. Otherwise, downside, not that interesting at the moment because we had a pretty hefty spike up at the moment. So wouldn't be too interested in that, although it could always happen. But no, not that interesting at the moment from my perspective. Maybe on the daily chart, 4-hour chart, if we break this bottom, for instance, that could signal more downside. Otherwise, a break of that light blue line to the upside makes more sense to me. In general, if we look at the market from a broader point of view, there's not much movement. There really isn't. The probably most interesting one, I would say, is the Aussie at the moment. There's been a lot of choppiness on the yen, on the Canadian dollar, on the New Zealand dollar, on the US dollar, Swiss franc, euro, pound. They all, have their quite a tight range, and nothing is really moving substantially at the moment. Now there are maybe a couple of exceptions, like the pound CAD or the euro pound, pairs that we don't usually cover in our sessions here. But just to give you an idea what could be moving maybe this week, euro pound is not a big mover though, but it does have a lot of downside momentum, so at least something. I'm not a big fan of the euro pound myself though. Let's see, the other one was the pound CAD. Let me use our usual template here. If I can find that usual template, there it is. So here, pound CAD. Now the reason for the pound CAD could be interesting is because it does have a lot of uptrend, and it has trended a lot prior to it. But the problem with that too is that it's pretty close to resistances. It does have some space to the upside still though, and one could maybe look for potential bounce back to the bottom of this triangle or the break of this triangle, for instance. That could be something that's interesting or trending this week. I would say the pound odd and euro odd are always interesting as well to keep an eye on. The euro odd, for instance, if we look at this particular pair, could have space to the 38.2 fib at 150 or the 50 fib at 151. That could happen to the upside, but definitely a lot of downside momentum. So we have to keep an eye on how these resistance fibs, how price could act at those resistance fibs, because those could be turning spots for more downside as well. All right, so upside to those fibs, then we could see maybe some downside pressure at those fibs. That's what I'm thinking about on the euro odd, by the way. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining. If you have any questions, let me know. Of course, make sure to send it to all attendees. In the meantime, next week we will not have a session. I will not be able to make it next week. We'll be back the week after that, though, as always, and the weeks after that, by the way, with our usual Monday 8 a.m. UK time session. At 12th of May, 19th of May. Unfortunately, we will have to have 2 Mondays. I will not be able to make it. That is a pity. 2 Mondays in a row. We'll be back Monday, 19th of May. All right, 19th of May. We 2-week pause. Apologies for that, but then we'll be back with our usual weekly webinar, of course, throughout the summer, at least in the Northern Hemisphere summer, and June, July, of course, and August. 19th of May, we'll be back. Usual 20-25 minute webinar and short forecast and look at what could happen at the upcoming week. Of course, this is only for educational and informational purposes, but you'll at least be able to see my views. In the meantime, don't forget to register to get the recording at blog.binary.com/weeklytradingroom. And do thank everyone for their attention and for spending their time with me here in this trading room. Hope that this info will be of value to you. I don't see any questions, so I guess we'll wrap it up for today. Once again, 19th of May, we'll be back. Wish everyone a good trading. In the meantime, great weeks ahead, and talk to you soon. Cheers.